Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining today's webinar on 3 steps to create a habit of research on your product team. I'm really excited to have UX expert extraordinaire Sarah Doody, who's going to give us an awesome masterclass. We're going to get started in just 1 minute for some of the latecomers. A few questions just to answer already. Yes, today's session will be recorded. We will be sending you a link to the recording as well as the slides and anything else we mention in today's webinar. If you have any questions, you can enter them in the GoToWebinar control panel in the questions tab. And at the end, there's a Q&A with Sarah Doody, so make sure to stay tuned for that. And again, we're going to get started in just a few moments. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with today's masterclass, 3 steps to create a habit of research on your product team. Again, my name is Ophir Prusak from Validately. I'm really excited to have Sarah Doody with us here today. Just a few things, like I said, yes, today's session will be recorded and we will be sending out the link to you at the end of today's session, together with a link for the slides and anything else we mentioned, and make sure to stick around for the Q&A at the end. The questions will be through the GoToWebinar control panel in the questions tab. So a little about Validately for those of you who aren't familiar with us. We're a complete user research platform that really includes everything that you need to do your UX testing, your UX research, and that includes an end-to-end solution of recruiting testers, analyzing the user experience, collaborating on the feedback and sharing the insights, and ultimately allowing you to have better products and better user experience. We do support both web and desktop and mobile, both on mobile web and native apps, and basically everything you need. We have all sorts of sizes of customers, from small startups to large international customers, which I'm sure you're aware of. And enough about Validately. You came here today to hear about Sarah Doody, but definitely if you want to hear more about us at the end, you can. What we'll cover today is how to do research more efficiently. We'll talk about research activities that you need to do each quarter and examples of research in action. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Sarah, who will be talking to you for the rest of today's session.
Thank you. I am really excited to be here today, and I'm just getting ready to share my screen. So bear with me here while I do that. Just a moment, everyone. There we go. Whoops. I think I saw it and then I just stopped seeing it. I'm not sure if you can help me out here.
Yeah, I think you need to do it yourself, Sarah, because when I tried to give you...
I'm looking for that control to share.
What's a webinar without some technical difficulties, huh?
I'm looking for that button to share my screen, and
Right. It's a little icon.
I'm not.
Left of go to webinar.
I see a camera.
It's below the camera. You don't see it?
I see, now I'm in full screen mode. I don't know if I need to be a presenter. I see my panelist.
Just one minute. You know what? So maybe we can. Oh, here we go. This should work now. Can you? There we go. Sorry about the technical difficulty, but I think we're now seeing your screen. Okay, there we go.
You got it. All right. Thanks for your patience, everyone. Like I said, every webinar seems to have some technical glitch, but here we go. So in case we have not met yet, I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about myself and some of my experience. So maybe some of you know me from Twitter or from my newsletter that I send out, or even maybe my YouTube channel, but I have been in the UX industry for about the past 14 years. And I've worked with companies of all different stages and sizes, which gives me a really unique perspective into making great products and what challenges can go along with that as well. And over the past 5 years, I've been running my own UX consultancy where I've got an even deeper look into how teams work and what struggles they come across. And I also do a lot of teaching, including conferences and workshops and webinars like this. So like I said, I've worked with companies at a lot of different stages and sizes, and that just gives me a really unique perspective because I understand, the struggles that a smaller startup faces versus a company that has tens of thousands or millions of users and going through the challenges of iterating that product and really hopefully doing research to understand those people a little bit more. And in working with all those companies and really throughout the course of my career, I have noticed a common frustration that maybe some of you encounter either on your team or with the clients you work with. And that frustration is that you should be doing more user research. I always love to say, if you're not talking to users, then you're not doing UX. So this is something that hopefully is a no-brainer, but in reality, it is hard to be doing more research and to make it a constant in our product development process. So I want to dig into this frustration a little bit more to help you see why this isn't happening and maybe also help you and your team realize that you're not the only ones that struggle with this. So why is research not a constant on your team? I think it really boils down to these 3 elements. First of all, you don't do research because your team kind of struggles with the quality of research that maybe you've done in the past. And we'll dive into each of these in a little bit, but you struggle because maybe you're getting pushback about that quality of research and people say things like, oh, that research was nice, but I don't believe those findings. Second is research is not a constant because your team or stakeholders or your client thinks that research is going to slow you down and it's going to affect your ability to ship the product and get those features out or get that prototype out. And the third reason why research really is not a constant is that, not surprisingly, budget. So many teams over and over say, we don't do more research because we don't have the budget. And I really believe that user research needs to be considered an investment instead of an expense. So hopefully today you'll realize how you can help your team invest more in research and get over this barrier of thinking that money is one of the reasons why research is not a constant on your team. So getting back to that challenge.
Hey, Sarah.
Yeah.
Sorry so much for interrupting. We actually forgot about a poll, which I think is very relevant here. I'm just going to launch it real quick to better understand how much research are the people actually doing here who are attending this masterclass. So just a really quick question of how many user interviews do you conduct in a year? Go ahead, select, maybe 0, you haven't actually started yet, 1 to 5, 6 to 20, or 21 or more. Again, just to get a good idea of this specific audience and also help people understand if, what am I doing comparing to other people? I see a lot of people already entering, a really good mix actually. I'll wait just another 3 or 4 seconds. We already have around 80% of the people voted. So let's wait a few more seconds. And okay, we're at 82%. So I'm gonna go ahead and close the poll. We're at a good representation. I'm going to share the results really quick. Interesting to see, we do have some people who are just getting started. They don't do any research, 20%. And then about a third each, I would say, of the rest of the groups in terms of 1 to 5, 6 to 20, or 21 or more. So for those who are doing 21 or more, that's great. But I will let you go ahead and get on with the masterclass.
Great. Great. No, that insight is really helpful because I think if you have not done any research yet, maybe you are facing these challenges that we're talking through right now, the quality, the speed, and the money. And if you are already doing research, by the end of this, you're going to see how hopefully you can be doing more research. So getting back to that challenge of quality, maybe you've heard of the coffee shop research method or guerrilla usability testing and things like that. And we don't have time to get into the details of it today, but I am not the biggest fan of this method of research because I feel like if you're approaching strangers in a coffee shop, you don't know anything about them. So you don't know if they fit the criteria of the person who is most likely to be interested in your product. So that's why I'm not a huge fan of that coffee shop research. And hopefully you have graduated from coffee shop research and maybe you've realized, okay, in order to increase the quality of what we're learning in our research, we need to be recruiting our own user research participants. So making sure that the people we're talking to have that criteria. And maybe you've used an online tool to be able to do that, but still you might face a challenge of quality on your team because maybe people on your team say to you, you know, the people that were answering all those questions on our usability test online, they just could have been basically professional usability testers. They could have been people who were bored at work, trying to make some extra money. So how do we really know they're answering honestly? I actually was talking to a friend who's a user researcher, and she said some pushback from one of her former colleagues was maybe those people are just like bored at a library trying to make some extra money. So we don't want to risk the quality of our research. The next problem that you maybe face is speed, right? You have tried to do your own recruiting for research participants, but you quickly realize that that can be a really, really slow process. And if you've never been through this process before, just think of all the steps. You have to identify the criteria of who the people are that you want to talk to. Then you have to make some type of screener or survey to then send out to people to try and recruit them. And then you have to go through all those answers and then you have to schedule them. And that can take days, but in reality, probably weeks, especially if you are collaborating with team members and things like that. So that's just one of the examples of where speed can start to slow you down. But I want to go into a little bit more detail with an example. So let's imagine that we need to do some usability testing on a prototype of a new checkout process for our e-commerce website. And we want to do a usability test with 10 people. Now, obviously, these timelines are just rough, but just thinking through kind of the steps we need to take. Probably in the first week, again, approximately, we need to find and recruit those people and schedule the sessions. And then in the next week, we're probably conducting those research sessions. And finally, in the third week, we are going through those 10 usability sessions, probably rewatching parts of the videos, reviewing our notes, synthesizing, analyzing, etc., so we can come up with some succinct findings to take back to our team. But here's where time really becomes an issue. So as we are doing that, as the user researchers, the engineering / product teams are probably doing this. They're probably wrapping up their current sprint that they're working on, or whatever you call kind of your chunks of work. So they're wrapping up that sprint, and then they're ready to jump into the next one. But the challenge is you're not done your research yet. So what happens, and this doesn't happen all the time, but I've definitely seen it happen enough to think that it's a valid point to make. So whenever they're ready to start that next sprint, are they going to wait for the research you're doing? Probably not. They're chomping at the bit to build. They're bored. They don't want to be idle. They need to see progress. So they decide, let's just start on it anyway and see how far we can get. And they continue to do that. They're building while you're doing research. They're building based on assumptions versus facts. And then what happens? Well, at the end of it, you come back and you say, hey guys, I'm done all my research, and guess what? The prototype we tested revealed that 70% of people couldn't get through that new checkout process. But because the engineering team was building, they come back and they say, hey, we're done. Like, we coded that prototype, and here it is. And by the way, we had time to do mobile as well. And that's where you end up in these disagreements, let's say, where the engineering team hasn't wanted to wait for the research, so they've gone and built, and then you end up in this situation where they've maybe built something that has flaws. So the next reason that we're probably not doing enough research, like we said, is money, where you don't have budget to hire another researcher, and maybe you don't know how to scale your research team. And you probably feel this tension, right? Where if you're lucky enough to have a researcher on your team, they are severely outnumbered between the engineering/product team, and they just honestly cannot keep up with the volume of work that the engineering product team is able to be producing. So I want you to be thinking about which of these struggles is causing your team to not do research as frequently. Is it quality? Is it speed? Is it money? And these would be great things to go back and discuss with your team after today's class as well. But I want you to really think about it, because once you identify the problem, then you can start to fix it with a possible solution. So if you only remember one thing today, I really want you to remember this, that to create better products on your team, you need to spend more time doing actual research and less time planning to do the research. And what do I mean by that? So we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to maximize the time of the researchers on our team, because with the previous slides, we just saw how oftentimes teams only have 1 or 1.5 or 2 researchers, right? And they're overwhelmed. So how can we deal with that overwhelm? Well, we need to look at how those researchers are spending their time. And this visual here is meant to represent, like on the left, where your researchers are spending too much time. It's in that recruiting and scheduling phase. Do they really need to be sending out Google Calendar invites and things like that to try and recruit and find and schedule those people? Where we want them to be spending more of their time is in kind of their zone of genius, right? In the actual conducting of the research, in the analyzing of that research, letting people know on the team, here's what we learned, here's how it should inform what you're going to build. And I don't know about your team, but on teams that I've worked with in the past, and even earlier in my own user research practice, if I looked at kind of my stack of research tools, it looked like this at times. So for each of those phases of recruiting and scheduling, conducting, analyzing, and sharing the findings, it was a giant web of tools that I was constantly needing to switch between. And this creates a problem because you're just wasting a lot of time going from tool to tool, Plus, it makes it very difficult for you to invite anyone else into your research process if they have to first understand like where the recruiting survey is, or where you've done the schedule, or where the notes are, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a problem, and the great thing today is that now there are so many tools, Validately included, that let you do all these things within one single place, one single product. So you can do your recruiting and your scheduling and your conducting of research, analyzing, and even creating your insights reports and sharing those with your team. You can do that all in one place thanks to tools such as Validately. And so what we want to do is get over this problem that I think a lot of user research teams have, where really the UX of doing user research is broken if this is what your team's structure looks like. So how do we actually start doing more research? There's 4 things that we really need to focus on. We are going to dive into one of these today, but first we need to integrate research into your team's design and development process. We need to figure out how to spend less time on the logistics, scheduling, and recruiting and things like that. And we need to hopefully reduce the amount of tools we're using so that our job as researchers is easier, but also, even if you're not a researcher, it makes it easier for you to be involved in the research process because everything is all in one place and you're not hunting around 20 different pieces of software to find things. And also, we want to make it much easier for you to be able to report insights to your team, because in order for your team to make better product decisions, they need to be armed with the insights from your research. And it's your job to communicate those insights in a way that has impact so that people remember them and the insights just don't become a boring report in Microsoft Word or Dropbox that no one ever looks at again. So before we go any further, I want you to make sure that after this, you create a plan for research, because I know you all have the goal to do more research. You wouldn't be here if you didn't want to be doing more research. But in order to actually achieve that goal, we have to make a plan, because as that saying goes, a goal without a plan is just a wish. So I want to give you a plan for how your team can actually map out doing more research over the course of a year and quarter by quarter. But first, I want you to take a look at this visual. And this slide, I love it. I feel like I use it all the time, but it is so important because too many teams do not embrace this cycle of launch and learn. And I think either one of 2 things happen. Teams either do a ton of research up front, so they're doing a ton of learning, and then they launch, and that's when the research stops. That's a problem, because we need to be constantly evaluating whether or not the features that we're launching are actually working. So if your team is not in this cycle of launch and learn, this plan and this quarterly research schedule is going to help you see how you can get into this habit, because if you're not learning at each point, then you're completely building blind. And what happens when you build blind? Well, you end up needing to go back and redo features. And I'm guessing some of you are kind of chuckling right now, because maybe even this week, your team has been going back and redoing features because after you launched it, either no one used it, no one cared, or you got a ton of feedback from users saying it was so difficult, they couldn't figure it out, things like that. So that's why I say research is really an investment, not an expense, because if we can invest the time and invest the money up front, then we will not, or we will at least lessen the chances that we need to go back and encounter the expense of spending our development and design team's resources to redo a ton of stuff. So the best products really succeed in this constant cycle of launching and learning. And so we need to make sure that we're investing in research, so that our teams are guided by the most recent insights, and we're not acting on findings that we discovered 6 months ago. Because if people are using our products, we need to make sure that we're getting timely feedback from them. So some quick recap here. The reason that we need to launch and learn is so that we're saving time, we're saving money, because we're not going back and redoing and fixing a lot of what could have been mitigated if we had just done research. We're also ensuring that we're going to make something that people actually want. We're equipping our team to operate less on assumptions and more on facts. And really, I think too, this can impact your team culture, because if your team is just stuck in this cycle of launching and launching and launching, you can easily burn out, to be honest. But when you are doing a cycle of launching and learning, every time you do research to validate what your team just launched, that's kind of a nice pick-me-up for your team, if you will. It means so much to be able to go back to your product or design or engineering teams and say, hey guys, that feature that we launched last week, like, this is the impact of it. Here's feedback from people. They're loving it. Here's some metrics, etc. And that's going to be a boost of encouragement and excitement for your team that can easily, honestly, get a little burnt out if you're just in this constant grind of launch, launch, launch. One thing that maybe you are thinking is that, okay, I know we should be doing more research, but research creates a bottleneck in our team's workflow. Maybe you've always struggled with trying to figure out how to integrate it into your workflow. So the good news is that research does not have to be a bottleneck if you plan it out and if you consider how can it really happen in parallel. So I want to go into a bit of a hypothetical here for us, just so we can talk about a real situation. Chances are your product and your engineering teams are used to some sprint cycle. We're just going to go with 2-week sprint cycles for simplicity here. And they do this because they're able to predict how much work they can actually get done in those 2 weeks, right? And so this is what a lot of you are doing right now, or something like this, and you may call it different things and have different timelines, but you have this set cycle of work. So week 1, week 2 of your 2-week sprint, and then you launch something, and then you do that again and again. But let's say you try and do some research. What a lot of you are doing is that you're trying to integrate the research into that 2-week sprint cycle, and that doesn't work. That is where you run into problems and you create a lot of stress on your teams, because you are taking time away from the engineering and product teams and you're giving that to the research team. So this creates a big problem, and this is where a lot of teams get frustrated, because someone is going to get the short end of the straw and need to rush or be under a lot of stress. So if you really want to create a better environment, let's say, for everyone to do their job well and not be under such a time crunch, what you need to do is you need to maybe rethink your sprint cycles. And I'm not saying that you need to do this for every single sprint, but I am saying that when you know research is going to be an important part of a certain feature launch, maybe consider adjusting your work sprints. So let's say we knew we really needed to do some research. What we might consider is expanding our work cycle to 3 weeks so that we can really truly dedicate time to research and also not put stress on the engineering team. The other great thing about this is that if we add in another block of time, another week to be doing research, then that does not stress out the engineering and product team. And it also allows for us as the researchers to involve the engineers, the designers, etc., in our research process. And that is crucial. I would really encourage you to write down, involve others in the research process. Because if you can invite other people into your research process, then it's going to do two things. First, it's going to make sure that you are all on the same page about the research goals, about the types of people that you're going to be doing the research with. But if other people are involved in the research process earlier, then they're going to feel a lot more bought in to the research you're doing. And it, I believe, will decrease the chances that whenever you do come back and have some insights to share, you're going to have less risk that people are going to ignore that research or not believe in it because you've involved them earlier in the process, so they feel bought in. But like I said, not every sprint cycle needs to get expanded like this. But the point I'm trying to make is that if you know you really want to do research for a certain launch, then don't stress yourself out and try and shove research into your 2 weeks. Expand it and give it room and time that it really requires. So next, I want to get into how do we actually create that cadence of research on your team? Because now, hopefully you've started to identify, some of the reasons why your team is not doing enough research. And maybe you've realized, wow, we really should consider expanding our sprint cycles for some of our features. Or maybe I do need to invite other people into my research process to get them bought in. But how do you actually create this cadence of research on your team? So getting very, very specific here. If you look at your year and then we just think of one quarter, I believe there's really 3 activities that your team should be doing to create a culture of research on your team each quarter. And we're going to spend the rest of our time together going through some examples here. But the first activity that you should be doing is evaluative research, meaning that you are evaluating whether or not people can use your product, your prototype. Is it working? Next activity you need to be doing is you need to be evangelizing. You need to be communicating that research and educating your team, because one of the big challenges I find is that the research, once it's done, not enough teams are referring back to it. They're not internalizing that research. It's not becoming a constant on their team. It's just happening in the 60-minute meeting that you had for the research to get presented. So we need to make sure that each quarter we are proactively evangelizing the research on our team. And the third thing we need to be doing is explorative research or generative research, where we can be thinking about those bigger picture problems that our users might have and customers might have. So evaluative research, that's things like moderated, remote or in-person usability testing, where people are going through your checkout process, doing card sorts. Maybe you're reviewing analytics to find out where in the product there may be problems so that then you can follow up with more qualitative research. Maybe part of your evaluative research activities is testing out new analytics tools on your product or testing out other research tools. Maybe you're spending time reviewing customer service feedback or feedback from other tools that you might be using. So that's what I mean when I say evaluative research activities. For evangelizing your research, like I said, this is about being proactive and making sure that research becomes a conversation on your team and is not just a silo of information that gets presented, in your research findings meeting. So what do I mean specifically when I say you can be evangelizing the research on your team? You need to get into the regular habit of talking about your research. And in the same way that some technology teams have a demo day or show and tell day, I believe the research team should be doing this as well, where every month, every 2 weeks, whatever you feel is good for your team, you are having a conversation about what you have been learning and also getting a sense of what the rest of the team might be fuzzy on or making assumptions on, because that will help you decide things that you could be researching to bring clarity back to the rest of the team. So you're having conversations about maybe upcoming features to figure out, okay, what should you as the research team be researching? Also, using this as an opportunity to talk about maybe any recent research learnings, present really interesting analytics findings, updated personas, whatever your team calls them. And like I said, uncover any assumptions that maybe your team has so you can confirm or deny those assumptions. And the third research activity that you really need to be doing every quarter is this explorative research or generative research, which is more qualitative in nature, where you're trying to understand the big picture, understand maybe an opportunity in your industry or with your customers. And I think a lot of teams get very nervous about this type of research because it can feel very time consuming. A lot of the kind of explorative research projects I do are with a minimum of 14 one-on-one, hour-long, in-person user research interviews. Sometimes that involves travel. I did a project last year or the year before, I forget, where I did 18 one-on-one user research interviews in New York City and Stockholm, Sweden. So you can imagine how long that took. So yes, I will completely acknowledge that this type of research can be time consuming and can be intimidating, but you get so much value out of this research that I think it is realistic to do it once a quarter. And not every quarter do you need to be traveling the world and meeting people in person, but you can be doing things like surveys, one-on-one phone calls, just get on the phone with people, one-on-one interviews where you're doing it in person or remote, creating diary studies for people to do, or doing field visits. Maybe you're out in physical store locations or factories or hospitals or whatever locations make sense for your product. But also I think market research and competitive research fall into this as well. And also I would not discount the value of relying on social media as a source of insights into those bigger picture problems. Thinking about what people are writing on maybe your Facebook page, or if your product has a Facebook group, or looking at reviews that people have if you're an app in the App Store, things like that. Leveraging these places online where people may be praising or complaining about your product. So getting even more granular here, now that we understand the types of research that I really want you to consider to be doing each quarter, you're probably wondering, okay, well, how do I actually do all of this? So what you can think about is doing some type of evaluative research every 2 weeks, evangelizing your research findings or having that conversation every 4 weeks, so once a month, and then considering doing some type of explorative research or generative research every 12 weeks, so once a quarter. Now, I am a huge fan of teaching by examples, so I want to break this down even further. I want us to imagine that we all work at an airline and we're on that user research team. And we are adopting this habit of doing quarterly research and doing it in that cadence of 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 12 weeks. So this is how our research activities could break down. Now, don't freak out because I know this seems complicated. So let's go each month because it's actually pretty simple. So we have our 3 months laid out here. And as you can see, in each of the 3 months, we are doing 2 types of evaluative research. So we've got 2 mini evaluative research projects, and some of those projects are usability testing with 6 participants. Another one is card sorting with 12 participants. Another one is testing out a new analytics software that we want to try out. Maybe you decided you want to explore using Full Story. That could be an example of one of your evaluative research projects. I put projects in quotations. So as you can see, you don't need to be intimidated by thinking about doing this frequent evaluative research because it does not mean every time you are going through and recruiting people and scheduling them and things like that. So hopefully you're seeing how you could realistically each month do 2 types of evaluative research activities. Then each month you see a blue box, and the blue box are your chance to evangelize the research. So that's just once a month. That feels very doable to me. And then finally, the purple box at the bottom right, that is for our larger quarterly explorative or generative research project, where maybe you are exploring, in our case at the airline, we know that the software that the agents use at the gate, like when you're ready to board the plane, the software they use at the gate is terrible. And we want to do some explorative research to understand like what exactly within the workflow of a gate agent who's trying to board the plane, what might we be able to do to make their life easier? So that might be an example of a larger generative or explorative research project. Now, let's dive a little deeper here. So just focusing on those evaluative research projects, the usability testing, things like that. What could we do to make our lives easier? So let's imagine that we at the airline have just launched a new version of our mobile boarding pass within our mobile app. And it's been totally redesigned because within the boarding pass and within the app, we added in this clever checklist so that people are educated about what they need to do before they get to the security checkpoint at the TSA so that they are not the ones holding up the line. So we're trying to be proactive as an airline and help those security lines go faster by educating our flyers in our app. So we just launched this and we're really excited about it. And we did a lot of research before, but now we need to do more. We need to learn because we just launched. So we're going to do 8 remote usability testing sessions, and they're going to be about 30 minutes each. We want to learn, do people even notice this new section? Do they understand the checklist? Can they use this? And we need to recruit people for these sessions. So we're going to recruit 10 people, I believe. And we have specific criteria though. We need them to have flown within at least 3 times in the last 2 months. And we want 50% of them to be a frequent flyer member. So if we were doing this, we've identified our research goals. We have some of our participant criteria. I'm just showing you some, but okay, now what do we do next? Well, using our existing tool stack, like many user research teams do, we are back to that web, that dreadful web of all of the tools. And we're using Google Sheets and Calendar and Calendly and all these things to do all the recruiting and the schedule and things. Then when it comes to actually planning and conducting the interviews, we're maybe recording them with Zoom, and then we're doing a backup with QuickTime on our computer in case Zoom dies. We're taking notes maybe in Google Docs and Google Sheets. We're storing the files on Dropbox. And then when it comes time to analyze it, we've got some stuff in Google, sometimes some things in Post-it notes, etc., right? Honestly, like I said, the UX of doing user research is sometimes pretty broken, let's be real. And the more important thing than kind of this cluster of all the tools is the fact that a lot of the tasks that our user research team is doing cut into the time that they should actually be doing the research. So just look on the left. Should the user researcher really be spending their time finding those people and finding where to post that screener, or literally going through the spreadsheet and doing the scheduling and sending out Google Calendar links and things like that? To me, that's a really bad use of the researcher's time. So we want to figure out, how do we optimize that a little more? And also just all that shifting between software makes your life confusing, but as I said before, it's important to involve other people in our research. But if we say to our colleagues, oh, go check out, the research findings for that research project, and that colleague has to jump around between different Dropbox folders and looking at your notes in a Google Doc and things like that, that's a terrible user experience for that person as well. Maybe you've experienced this in your own team. And so one way to get around this, I just want to jump back, this issue of our researchers spending a lot of time on things that maybe they shouldn't be spending their time on, like the recruiting, etc., and getting out of this kind of cluster of tools, is to find a way, like I said earlier, to consolidate our tool stack, to do more of our tasks all in one place so that we are not constantly shifting between, and so that it's not as intimidating for others to be a part of our process. And that's why Validately is a really great product that lets us do all of the things a researcher does all in one place, whether it's setting up that screener and then either you sending that screener to your existing customers to find those people, or Validately can go find those people for you. So that saves you a ton of time, which gives you more time to spend on the actual conducting of the research and the analyzing of research. And when it comes time to analyze and share that research, Validately also lets you do that by making it really easy to take, your notes that you were taking during that usability testing session, and take all the notes related to, say, navigation or checkout or whatever kind of the topics were, and quickly consolidate them and then present it in a way that is really a much better user experience for your team than sending them links to different Dropbox files and Google Docs and things like that. So hopefully by now you can see how our research process doesn't have to be as broken as it is right now. And if we fix that research process, it's going to empower us to have the time to actually do these quarterly research activities that I propose to you today. So just a few key takeaways for you and your team. If you're not doing user research already, if in the poll earlier you indicated you've done like 0 research or 1 to 5 interviews this year, don't worry, because the more you do, the easier it gets. The more comfortable you'll be with conducting the usability testing sessions, for example. But also, the more research you do, the more you will develop a bank of resources like screeners and discussion guides that you can reuse so that the time it takes to kind of spin up a research project is far less. But in order to get into that habit of creating a habit of research, you have to look at your entire product development process and realize that sometimes you might need to break from your traditional 2-week sprint, for example, to give that research the time it needs and to not stress out your development and product teams. Also, you realize that the more tools you have, the greater the barrier of entry is for your team. And so it means that they're going to get frustrated and not even want to get involved in the research or not even go look at those interviews and watch those videos because it's such a pain for them to go find them. We also need to make research a conversation. We need to make it a part of our team's language, and that's why it's so important for you to not only be the champion of doing research, but also evangelizing the research through getting some type of show and tell session on the calendar every month so you are telling the stories and showing the insights from the research that you've been doing. And like I said, get it on your calendar, because if you don't do this, it will never happen. Another really important thing when it comes to presenting your research findings is that you have to back up all your findings with evidence. You have to be like a lawyer and come to the table with little bits of evidence. If you don't have evidence, that means that people will more than likely push back on your findings and challenge you. So evidence means screenshots of analytics. It means clips of video from your interviewing sessions. And that's another great strong point of Validately, is that it makes it really easy for you to be able to gather those little bits of evidence and quickly integrate them into your research findings report. Also, I would just encourage you, don't give up after 1 quarter. You have to keep doing this quarter after quarter, because if you don't, it won't become a part of your culture. But if you do keep it up, then it's going to be easier. It's going to become more of a language and a conversation on your team, and you will be able to make products that are more informed from your actual users rather than assumptions on your team. So I really, really encourage you to take action. I'm all about action. I don't just like telling you what to do. I want to give you some homework. So in the slides, which you'll receive in a little bit, I really encourage you to do these things. Identify why your team is not doing more research. Inventory all the tools so you can really see what type of research stack your team is using. And then look at that list and figure out if there are tools that you could be using to streamline some of your research process. And finally, create a research calendar so that you can actually get this on your calendar. And in the follow-up email, you're going to get that recording, the links to the slides, and in there too will be a link to a quarterly research toolkit that I created for you, which is a Trello board. And if you're not in Trello, you can take this and put it into whatever format works for your team. But the toolkit's really going to break you down with an example of 1 quarter and breaking down how you truly can be mapping out the evaluative research projects you're going to do, the evangelizing you're going to do, and that higher level explorative research to identify opportunities for maybe your product in 6 months from now or something like that. So I really hope this was valuable to you today, but we wanted to leave just a few minutes for some of your questions. So I think we have time for a few questions here, so we can jump to that now.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sarah. We do have some really good questions. I'm going to have to pick some of the best ones. We'll try our best maybe to answer some afterwards. But let's actually start with Melanie, who has a very interesting question. It goes, a question about appropriate research methods. About a third of our users did not opt into a location service feature, and the team's hypothesis is that it's probably because of privacy concerns or maybe about battery drain. So the question is it better to send out a survey to these users, specifically asking them why they didn't opt in, or is there a better method?
Yeah, I think that is an example where a survey would be a really great opportunity to gather feedback, first of all, very fast and in a very cost-efficient way, especially because this is kind of a yes or no type answer. It's not something where you would probably want to ask a ton of follow-up questions, but I always recommend to people that whenever you do a survey, always give people the option to give you their email address in case you have follow-up questions, and always have a question at the end that says something along the lines of, do you have anything else you'd like to share with us? Because you never know what might be on that person's mind or what the survey triggers in them that could lead to some really awesome piece of feedback that you would not have otherwise received from them.
Great, great. So Anna asks, how much research do you show the engineering team and the management? I thought it's best to filter the data, analyzing and showing just the results instead of the raw data. So maybe if you can just address a little about how much is too much and how much is maybe too little in terms of showing the engineering team and management.
Sure. So of course you don't want to bombard them with tons of hours of video or tons of spreadsheets if it's more quantitative. Your job is really to synthesize that. But here's the thing. Like I said earlier, you need to synthesize and say, here are the insights we had, and then you need to back it up with evidence. So that's where you need to bring in the data or the evidence, the video clips, the numbers you've crunched, whatever it is, because that will help give the engineers the evidence they need to believe in the research. Otherwise, like I said, you risk that people are going to push back. But if you have a video clip that shows person after person after person not able to save to their wish list or check out or whatever it is, it's harder for people to argue with that, because honestly, they'll kind of look ridiculous if they're arguing what was just presented in 7 videos or in the numbers that you've crunched.
Makes sense, makes sense. Another excellent question from Maria, who asks, can you show examples of how to evangelize effectively? Sometimes there's an issue where people don't actually pay attention to the research findings.
Good question. And that is where I think video can be so powerful. Of course, not all research you do will have video, but that's why in this kind of cadence of research, in this quarterly plan, I really encourage you to do that evaluative research, because let's imagine it's your once a month kind of show and tell or evangelizing session with your team. If you do have like just at least one video in there, that's going to help be the glue that gets people to stick and pay attention. But I do think that part of it is learning how to present your research in a way that is human and that almost like brings people into the world of user X. So if I were presenting research findings for the gate agent at the airline, I might say, okay, now imagine that we are Susan, who works at Dallas Fort Worth Airport. She's been there for 20 years and she's been using this software. And by framing the research and the conversation like that, it invites people into this story almost. And people's brains are wired to remember stories, and it's going to be more engaging than putting up some spreadsheet of numbers and things like that.
Perfect. So unfortunately, we are out of time, but stay tuned. Just at the end, there'll be a couple of quick questions. And as we said, we will be sending out either later today or early tomorrow morning an email with a follow-up with a recording, link to the slides, as well as the Research Toolkit, the Trello board. So again, thanks everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks, guys.